Imagine standing at the edge of a mountain, the wind tearing at your cloak, and knowing that one step backward means life, and one step forward means oblivion. This was not myth. This was justice in Sparta. Sparta, remembered as a city of bronze shields and crimson cloaks, where men were said to be born warriors and courage was carved into eternity. The stand at Thermopylae, the unbreakable phalanx, the king who defied an empire. These are the images that echo through time. But this is only the mask. Behind the legend lies a truth few dare to examine. A society that made fear its greatest weapon. A people who transformed cruelty into ritual and survival into a sacred duty. Tonight we step behind the mask of glory, into the shadows of Sparta. The descent into madness. A society built on fear. Sparta was not merely a city. It was a machine, fueled by conquest, paranoia, and the belief that weakness was a disease. For every Spartan warrior, there were 10 helots, state-owned slaves who plowed the fields and dreamed of freedom. The imbalance was terrifying. The rulers of Sparta lived with the constant dread of rebellion. Fear did not haunt them, it shaped them, and so, fear was sculpted into law. From the moment of birth, children were judged, measured, and molded. The Agoge, Sparta's brutal education system, stripped away tenderness like flesh from bone. At 7 years old, boys were torn from their families and plunged into hunger, pain, and ceaseless discipline. To be caught stealing food meant a beating, not for the theft, but for being discovered. Deception, endurance, cruelty. These were the virtues of survival. Mercy was not just discouraged, it was erased. To love too freely, to pity too easily, was to endanger the phalanx. In Sparta, compassion was contagion, and contagion was death. Fear was not a symptom of Sparta's system. Fear was the system. The weight of a sin, the betrayal of the phalanx. If fear was the foundation, betrayal was the deepest crack. On the battlefield, the phalanx was more than a formation. It was a covenant. Each shield guarded the man beside it. To falter was to break the chain, to risk the entire wall. And so, when a soldier abandoned his post, the punishment was not only death, it was spectacle. The condemned knelt in the dust, stripped of armor, surrounded by his unit. Silence hung heavy. Then came the first strike, the wooden shaft of a spear crashing into bone. Not the bronze tip, which killed quickly, but the blunt handle that shattered ribs and left him screaming. One by one, his comrades stepped forward. The circle moved with the precision of battle, each blow measured, each strike deliberate. The condemned looked into the eyes of those who had once laughed with him, fought beside him, now transformed into executioners by duty. This was no frenzy, it was choreography. A dance of discipline, teaching every man who watched that to betray the phalanx was to betray Sparta itself. Honor and horror became indistinguishable. The chilling echo, Mount Taygetus and the abyss. From the battlefield, we ascend to the mountains, to Mount Taygetus, where justice was carved into stone and shadow. The condemned were marched along winding paths, bound and exposed, the climb itself a form of torment. At the summit waited the apothetai, a chasm that yawned like a hungry mouth. Some were granted final words. Most were granted only silence. Then came the push. The body plummeted, striking rock after rock, screams torn apart by the abyss until only echoes remained. But Taygetus did not devour only criminals. It consumed infants. Every newborn was inspected. If deemed weak, deformed, or simply unworthy, they too were carried up the path. Their cries, swallowed by the same darkness. The abyss became Sparta's most chilling monument, a grave for both traitors and innocents. It was not a void of nature, but a philosophy in stone. Life itself was conditional, and mercy was weakness. Sacred cruelty, the Temple of Artemis Orthia. If the mountain was Sparta's executioner, the temple was its priest. At dawn, the condemned were dragged to the altar of Artemis Orthia. Here, where animals were sacrificed, humans were bound. But no quick blade ended their suffering. Instead, bullhide whips embedded with bone and metal tore through flesh. Each lash a prayer, each scream an offering. The priests watched carefully, pausing when the victim weakened, reviving them just enough to continue. This was not cruelty in chaos. It was cruelty as ceremony. The suffering itself was proof of divine justice. Crowds gathered. Parents brought children to watch. They did not see horror. They saw holiness. Blood on the altar was sanctified as duty, as worship. In Sparta, cruelty was not hidden in shadows. It was exalted in the open air, blessed by gods, sanctified by ritual. The children of violence, Agoge, and the making of monsters. But Sparta's most chilling experiment was not on its criminals. It was on its children. In the Agoge, innocence was a fire that burned away, leaving only steel. Boys were marched to executions, forced to watch men beaten, broken, and humiliated. At first, they stood silent. Later, they were ordered to participate, to hurl stones, to spit, to strike. Each act eroded compassion. Each lesson taught them that cruelty was not evil, it was order. By adulthood, they no longer questioned, they no longer felt. They had been sculpted into weapons. Soldiers who could kill without hesitation, citizens who could obey without doubt. The Agoge did not merely train warriors. It manufactured monsters, the hidden killers, the Krypteia. For some, even this was not enough. The Krypteia, Sparta's secret brotherhood of assassins, selected the most ruthless youths. Their task was not war, it was murder. By night, they hunted helots, slaves who appeared too strong, too clever, too hopeful. They crept into huts, strangling men in their sleep. They ambushed women in fields. They pursued children who showed promise. It was not random, it was policy, a ritual culling designed to prevent rebellion before it could begin. And imagine the boy of 17, his hands trembling as he slit his first throat. Instructors praised him, called it duty, called it honor. Fear turned to numbness. Numbness calcified into pride. The Krypteia was not about killing slaves. It was about completing the transformation of Spartan youth into shadows, men who no longer recognized certain lives as human. The terror of the massacres. If the Krypteia whispered death, the massacres screamed it. At times, the state decreed that helots must die in the thousands. They were summoned under false pretenses, told they were being honored or needed for labor. They came willingly, unaware they had been marked for death. Then the slaughter began. Spears pierced bodies in crowded pens. Throats were cut in silence. Ropes tightened until faces turned pale and still. Bodies were cast into pits, covered hastily with earth, or burned in great heaps. Survivors were told lies, that their fellows had been relocated or struck by plague. But hints of truth always leaked, deliberately, cruelly. Enough to remind every helot that safety did not exist. To live as a helot was to live as prey, invisible or dead. And to live as a Spartan was to accept that survival demanded blood. The price of power, Sparta's slow collapse. For a time, this system worked. Fear kept the helots subdued. Fear made Sparta's armies feared across the Greek world. But cruelty is a brittle foundation. Generations of massacres left the helot population obedient but hollow. Generations of brutality left Spartans disciplined but unimaginative. While Athens debated philosophy and traded ideas across seas, Sparta stagnated. While other states advanced, Sparta repeated the rituals of fear, convinced they were unshakable. Even Persia, a land no stranger to cruelty, called Spartan punishments excessive. Traders hesitated to enter the city. Allies grew distant. Sparta, feared by all, stood isolated, surrounded by silence. And when new tactics arose, when armies learned to adapt, Sparta could not. The crimson cloaks faded, the phalanx cracked, and the mighty warrior state, once unyielding, began its slow collapse. Reflection. Lessons from the darkness. Sparta's legacy is not just one of courage, but of contradiction. A people who preached honor yet sanctified cruelty, who built strength yet hollowed out their own humanity, who feared weakness so deeply that they destroyed themselves in the pursuit of erasing it. The lesson is clear. Fear may hold a city together for a time, but fear cannot build a future. Cruelty may preserve a state, but cruelty also consumes it. The echoes from Sparta, the screams from Mount Taygetus, the crack of whips at Artemis's altar, The silence of children taught to hate mercy still reach us across the centuries, and they whisper the same haunting truth. A society without compassion may endure for a time, but it cannot endure forever.